part 4 of a series of unfortunate events, The Miserable Mill, book 4. This is the picture for chapter 7. I'll be reading chapter 7 and 8. Chapter 7. If you have ever had a miserable experience, then you probably had it said to you that you would feel better in the morning. This, of course, is utter nonsense, because a miserable experience remains a miserable experience, even on the loveliest of mornings. For instance, if it were your birthday and a wart removal cream was the only present you received, someone might tell you to get a good night's sleep and wait until morning. But in the morning, the tube of wart removal cream would still be sitting there next to your uneaten birthday cake, and you would feel as miserable as ever. My chauffeur once told me that I would feel better in the morning, but when I woke up, the two of us were still on a tiny island surrounded by man-eating crocodiles, and, as I'm sure you can understand, I didn't feel any better about it. And so it was with the Baudelaire orphans. As soon as the foreman began clanging his pots together, Claus opened his eyes and asked where in the world he was. And Violet and Sunny did not feel better at all. "What is wrong with you, Claus?" Violet asked. Claus looked at Violet carefully, as if they had met once, years ago, and he had forgotten her name. "I don't know," he said. "I'm having trouble remembering things. What happened yesterday?" "That's what we want to ask you, Claus," Violet said, but she was interrupted by their rude employer. "Get up, you lazy midgets," the foreman shouted, walking over to the Baudelaire bunk and clanging his pots together again. "The Lucky Smells lumber mill has no time for dawdling. Get out of bed this instant and go straight to work." Claus's eyes grew very wide, and he sat up in bed. In an instant, he was walking toward the door of the dormitory without a word to his sisters. "That's the spirit," Foreman Flaccotono said, and clanged his pots together again. "Now everybody, on to the lumber mill." Violet and Sunny looked at one another and hurried to follow their brother and the other employees, but Violet took one step, and something made her stop. On the floor next to the Baudelaire bunk were Claus's shoes, which she had removed the night before. Claus had not even put them on before walking outside. "His shoes," Violet said, picking them up. "Claus, you forgot your shoes." She ran after him, but Claus did not even look back. By the time Violet reached the door, her brother was walking barefoot across the courtyard. "Grummel?" Sunny called after him, but he did not answer. "Come on, children," Phil said. "Let's hurry to the lumber mill." "Phil, there's something wrong with my brother," Violet said, watching Claus open the door of the lumber mill and lead the other employees inside. "He scarcely says a word to us. He doesn't seem to remember anything. And look, he didn't even put on his shoes this morning." "Well, look on the bright side," Phil said. "We're supposed to finish tying today, and next we do the stamping. Stamping is the easiest part of the lumber business." "I don't care about the lumber business," Violet cried. "Something is wrong with Claus." "Let's not make trouble, Violet," Phil said, and walked off toward the lumber mill. Violet and Sunny looked at one another helplessly. They had no choice but to follow Phil across the courtyard and into the mill. Inside, the string machine was already whirring, and the employees were beginning to tie up the last few batches of boards. Violet and Sunny hurried to get a place next to Claus, and for the next few hours they tied knots and tried to talk to their brother. But it was difficult to speak to him over the whirring of the stirring machine and the clanging of the foreman's pots, and Claus never answered them. Finally, the last pile of boards was tied together, and Phil turned off the string machine, and everybody received their gum. Violet and Sunny each grabbed one of Claus's arms and dragged their barefooted brother to the corner of the mill to talk to him. Claus, please talk to me," Violet cried. "You're frightening us. You've got to tell us what Dr. Orwell did, so we can help you." Claus simply stared at his sister with widened eyes. "Ishan!" Sunny shrieked. Claus did not say a word. He did not even put his gum into his mouth. Violet and Sunny sat down beside him, confused and frightened, and put their arms around their brother as if they were afraid he was floating away. They sat there like that, a heap of Baudelaires, until Foreman Flaccotono banged his pots together to signal the end of the break. "Stamping time," the foreman said, pushing his stringy white wing out of his eyes. "Everybody line up for stamping, and you," he said, pointing to Claus, you lucky midget, will be operating the machine. Come over here so I can give you instructions." "Yes, sir," Claus said in a quiet voice, and his sister gasped in surprise. It was the first time he had spoken since they were in the dormitory. Without another word, he stood up, disentangled himself from his siblings, and walked toward the foreman while his sisters looked on amazedly. Violet turned to her baby sister and brushed a small scrap of string out of her hair, something her mother used to do all of the time. The eldest Baudelaire remembered, as she had remembered so many times, the promise she had made to her parents when Sunny was born. "You are the eldest Baudelaire child," her parents had said, "and as the eldest, it will always be your responsibility to look after your younger siblings. Promise us that you will always watch out for them and make sure they don't get into trouble." Violet knew, of course, that her parents had never guessed when they told her this, that the sort of trouble her siblings would get into would be ostentatiously, a word which here means really, really horrendous. But still she felt as if she had let her parents down. Claus was clearly in trouble, and Violet could not shake the feeling that it was her responsibility to get him out of it. The foreman whispered something to Claus, who walked slowly over to a machine covered in smokestacks and began to operate its controls. Foreman Flacotono nodded to Claus and clanged his pots together again. "Let the stamping begin," he said, in his terrible muffled voice. The Baudelaires had no idea what Foreman Flacotono meant by stamping, but thought maybe it involved jumping up and down on the boards, for some reason, like stamping on ants. But it turned out to be more like stamping a library book. The workers would lift a bundle of boards and place it on a special mat, and the machine would bring its huge, flat stone down on top of the boards with a thunderous stamp, leaving a label in red ink that said, "Lucky Smells Lumbermill." Then everyone had to blow on the stamp so it dried quickly. Violet and Sunny couldn't help wondering if people who would make their houses out of these boards, would mind having the name of the lumber mill written on the walls of their homes. But more important, they couldn't help wonder how Claus knew how to work the stamping machine, and why the foreman was having their brother at the controls instead of Phil or one of the other employees. "You see," Phil said to the Baudelaire sisters from across the bundle of boards, "there's nothing wrong with Claus. He's working the machine perfectly. You spent all that time worrying for nothing." "Stamp." "Maybe," Violet said doubtfully, blowing on the M of the lumber mill. "And I told you that stamping was the easiest part of the lumber mill industry," Phil said. "Stamp. Your lips get a little sore from all the blowing, but that's all." "Whirl," Sunny said, which meant something like, "That's true, but I'm still worried about Claus." "That's the spirit," said Phil, misunderstanding her. "I told you that if you just looked on the bright side." Stem crash. "Ah!" Phil fell to the floor in mid-sentence, his face pale and sweaty. Of all the terrible noises to be heard at the Lucky Smells lumber mill, this was one of the most terrible by far. The thunderous stamping sound had been cut off by a wrenching crash and a piercing shriek. The stamping machine had gone horribly wrong, and the huge flat stone had not been brought down where it was supposed to be brought down, on the bundle of boards. Most of the stone had been brought down by the string machine, which was now hopelessly smashed, but part of it had been brought down on Phil's leg. The foreman dropped his pots and ran over to the controls of the stamping machine, pushing the dazed Claus aside. With a flip of the switch, he brought the stone up again, and everyone gathered around to see the damage. The cage part of the string machine was split open like an egg, and the string had become completely entwined and entangled, and I simply cannot describe the grotesque and unnerving sight. The words grotesque and unnerving here mean twisted, tangled, stained, and gory. Of poor Phil's leg. It made Violet's and Sunny's stomachs turn to gaze upon it, but Phil looked up and gave them a weak smile. "Well," he said, "this isn't too bad. My left leg is broken, but at least I'm right-legged. That's pretty fortunate." "Gee," one of the other employees murmured. "I thought he'd say something more along the lines of, 'Ah, my leg, my leg.'" "If someone could just help me get to my foot," Phil said, "I'm sure that I can get back to work." "Don't be ridiculous," Violet said. "You need to go to the hospital." "Yes, Phil," said another employee. "We have these coupons from last month. 50% off a cast at the AHA Memorial Hospital. 2 of us will chip in and get your leg all fixed up. I'll call for an ambulance right away." Phil smiled. "That's very kind of you," he said. "This is a disaster," the foreman shouted. "This is the worst accident in the history of the lumber mill." No, Phil said. "It's fine. I've never liked my left leg so much anyway. Not your leg, you overgrown midget, Foreman Flacotono said impatiently. The string machine, the cost of an inordinate amount. Those cost an inordinate amount of money. What does inordinate mean? Somebody asked. It means many things, Claus said suddenly, blinking. It can mean irregular, it can mean immoderate, it can mean disorderly. But in the case of money, it is more likely to mean excessive. Foreman Flacotono means the string machine costs a lot of money. The two Boiler sisters looked at one another and almost laughed in relief. Claus, Violet cried, you're defining things. Claus looked at his sisters and gave them a sleepy smile. I guess I am, he said. No Gmo, Sunny shrieked, which meant something along the lines of, you appear to be back to normal. And she was right. Claus blinked again, and then looked at a mess he had caused. What happened here? He asked, frowning. Phil, what happened to your leg? It's perfectly all right, Phil said, wincing in pain as he tried to move. It's just a little sore. You mean you don't remember what happened? Violet asked. What happened when? Claus asked, frowning. Why, look, I'm not even wearing any shoes. Well, I certainly remember what happened, the foreman shouted, pointing at Claus. You smashed our machine. I will tell Sir about this right away. You've put a complete halt to the stamping process. Nobody will earn a single coupon today. That's not fair, Violet said. It was an accident, and Claus never should have been put in charge of that machine. He didn't know how to use it. Well, he'd better learn, Foreman Flacotono said. Now pick up my pots, Claus. Claus went over to pick up the pots, but halfway there the foreman stuck his foot out, playing the same trick he had played the previous day, and I'm sorry to tell you that it worked just as well. Again, Claus fell right down to the ground of the lumber mill, and again his glasses fell off his face and skittered over to the bundle of boards, and worst of all, once again they became all twisted and cracked and hopelessly broken, like my friend Tatiana's sculptures. My glasses, Claus cried. My glasses are broken again. Violet got a funny feeling in her stomach, all quivery and slithery as if she had eaten snakes rather than gum during the lunch break. Are you sure, she asked Claus, are you sure you can't wear them? I'm sure, Claus said miserably, holding them up for Violet to see. Well, 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 the foreman said. How careless of you. I guess you're due for another appointment with Dr. Orwell. We don't want to bother him, Violet said quickly. If you give me some basic supplies, I'm sure I could build some glasses myself. No, the foreman said, his surgical mask curling into a frown. You'd better leave optometry to the experts. Say goodbye to your brother. Oh no, Violet said desperately. She thought again of the promise she made to her parents. We'll take him. Sunny and I will bring him to Dr. Orwell. Dearix, Sunny shrieked, which clearly meant something along the lines of, if we can't prevent him from going to Dr. Orwell, at least we can go with him. Well, all right, said the foreman, and his beady little eyes were even darker than usual. That's a good idea. Come to think of it, why don't all three of you go see Dr. Orwell? Chapter 8, here's the picture. And it says Dr. Georgina Orwell. Chapter 8. The Butterware orphans stood outside the gates of the Lucky Smells lumber mill and looked at an ambulance rushing past them as it took Phil to the hospital. They looked at the chewed-up gum letters of the lumber mill sign, and they looked down at the cracked pavement of the Paltryville street. In short, they looked everywhere, but at the eye-shaped building. We don't have to go, Violet said. We could run away. We could hide until the next train arrived and take it as far as possible. We know how to work in a lumber mill now, so we could get jobs in some other town. But what if he found us, Claus said, squinting at his sister. Who would protect us from Count Olaf if we were all by ourselves? We can protect ourselves, Violet replied. How can we protect ourselves, Claus asked, when one of us is a baby and another one can barely see? We've protected ourselves before, Violet said. Just barely, Claus replied. We've just barely escaped from Count Olaf each time. We can't run away and try to get along by ourselves, without glasses. We have to see Dr. Orwell and hope for the best. Sunny gave a little shriek of fear. Violet, of course, was too old to shriek, except in emergency situations. But she was not too old to be frightened. We don't know what will happen to us inside there, she said, looking at the black door in the eye's pupil. Think, Claus. Try to think. What happened to you when you went inside? I don't know, Claus said miserably. I remember trying to trying to tell Charles not to take me to the eye doctor, but he kept telling me that the doctors were my friends and not to be frightened. Ha! Sunny shrieked, which meant ha. And then what do you remember? Violet asked. Claus closed his eyes and thought. I wish I could tell you, but it's like that part of my brain has been wiped clean. It's like I was asleep from the moment I walked into that building until right there at the lumber mill. But you weren't asleep, Violet said. You were rocking around like a zombie. And then you caused that accident and hurt poor Phil. But I don't remember those things, Claus said. It's as if his voice trailed off and he stared into space for a moment. Claus? Violet asked worriedly. It's as if I were hypnotized, Claus finished. He looked at Violet and then at Sunny, and his sisters could see that he was figuring something out. Of course, hypnosis would explain everything. I thought hypnosis was only in scary movies, Violet said. Oh no, Claus answered. I read the Encyclopedia Hypnotica. I read the Encyclopedia Hypnotica just last year. It described all these famous cases of hypnosis throughout history. There was an ancient Egyptian king who was hypnotized. All the hypnotist had to do was shout Ramses, and the king would perform chicken imitations, even though he was in front of the royal court. That's very interesting, Violet said. But a Chinese merchant who lived during the Ling Dynasty was hypnotized. All the hypnotist had to do was shout Mao, and the merchant would play the violin, even though he had never seen one before. These are amazing stories, Violet said, but a man who lived in England in the 1920s was hypnotized. All the hypnotist had to do was shout Bloomsbury, and he suddenly became a brilliant writer, even though he couldn't read. Maisie, Sunny shrieked, which probably meant, we don't have time to hear all these stories, Claus. Claus grinned. I am sorry, but it was a very interesting book, and I am so pleased that it's coming in handy. Well, what did the book say about how to stop yourself from being hypnotized? Violet asked. Claus's grin faded. Nothing, he said. Nothing, Violet repeated. An entire encyclopedia about hypnosis and nothing about it at all? If it did, I didn't read any of it. I thought the parts about the famous hypnosis cases were the most interesting, so I read those, but I skipped some of the boring parts. For the first time since they had walked out of the gates of the lumber mill, the Baudelaire orphans looked at the eye-shaped building, and the building looked back at them. To Claus, of course, Dr. Orwell's office just looked like a big blur, but to his sisters it looked like trouble. The round door, painted black to resemble the pupil of the eye, looked like a deep and endless hole, and the children felt as if they were going to fall into it. I'm never skipping the boring parts of a book again, Claus said, and walked cautiously toward the building. You're not going inside, Violet said incredulously, a word which Harry used in a tone of voice to indicate Claus was being foolish. What else can we do? Claus said quietly. He began to feel along the side of the building to find the door, and at this point in the story of the Baudelaire orphans, I would like to interrupt for a moment and answer a question I'm sure you are asking yourself. It is an important question, one which many people have asked many times in many places all over the world. The Baudelaire orphans have asked it, of course. Mr. Poe has asked it. I have asked it. My beloved Beatrice, before her untimely death, asked it, although she asked it too late. The question is, where is Count Olaf? If you have been following the story of these three orphans since the beginning, then you know that Count Olaf is always lurking around these poor children, plotting and scheming to get his hands on the Baudelaire fortune. Within days of the orphans' arrival at a new place, Count Olaf is his nefarious assistants, the word nefarious here means Baudelaire hating, are usually on the scene, sneaking around and committing dastardly deeds. And yet, so far, he has been nowhere to be found. So as the three youngsters reluctantly head toward Dr. Orwell's office, I know you must be asking yourself, where in the world is this despicable villain? The answer is very nearby. Violet and Sunny walked to the eye-shaped building and helped their brother up the steps to the door, but before they could open it, the pupil swung open to reveal a person in a long white coat with a name tag reading Dr. Orwell. Dr. Orwell was a tall woman with blonde hair pulled back from her head and fashioned into a tight bun. She had big black boots on her feet and was holding a long black cane with a shiny red jewel on top. "Why, hello, Claus," Dr. Orwell said, nodding formally at the Baudelaires. "I didn't expect to see you back so soon. Don't tell me you broke your glasses again." "Unfortunately, yes," Claus said. "That's too bad," Dr. Orwell said, "but you're in luck. We have very few appointments today, so come on in, and I'll do all the necessary tests." The Baudelaire orphans looked at one another nervously. This wasn't what they had expected at all. They expected Dr. Orwell to be a much more sinister figure, Count Olaf in disguise, for instance, or one of his terrifying associates. They expected that they would be snatched inside the eye-shaped building and perhaps never return. Instead, Dr. Orwell was a professional-looking woman who was politely inviting them inside. "Come on," she said, showing the way with her black cane. "Shirley, my receptionist, made some cookies that you girls can eat in the waiting room while I make Claus's glasses. It won't take nearly as long as it did yesterday." "Will Claus be hypnotized?" Violet demanded. "Hypnotized?" Dr. Orwell repeated, smiling. "Goodness, no. Hypnosis is only in scary movies." The children, of course, knew this was not true, but they figured if Dr. Orwell thought it was true, then she probably wasn't a hypnotist. Cautiously, they stepped inside the eye-shaped building and followed Dr. Orwell down a hallway decorated with medical certificates. "This way to the office," she said. "Claus tells me you're quite a reader. Do you two read as well?" "Tell me he's quite a reader. Do you two read as well?" "Oh, yes," Violet said. She was beginning to relax. "We read whenever we can." "Have you ever encountered," Dr. Orwell said, "in your reading, the expression, 'you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar'?" "Tusmo," Sunny replied, which meant something along the lines of, "I don't believe so." "I haven't read too many books about flies," Violet admitted. "Well, the expression doesn't really have to do with flies," Dr. Orwell explained. "It's just a fancy way of saying you're more likely to get what you want by acting in a sweet way, like honey, rather than a distasteful way, like vinegar." "That's interesting," Claus said, wondering why Dr. Orwell was bringing it up. "I suppose you're wondering why I'm bringing it up," Dr. Orwell said, pausing in front of the door marked waiting room. "But I think all will be clear to you in just a moment. Now, Claus, please follow me to the office, and you girls can wait in the waiting room through this door." The children hesitated. "It will be just a few moments," Dr. Orwell said, and patted Sunny on the head. "Well, all right," Violet said, and gave her brother a wave as he followed the optometrist farther down the hallway. Violet and Sunny gave the door a push and went inside the waiting room and saw in an instant that Dr. Orwell was right. All was clear to them in a moment. The waiting room was a small one, and it looked like most waiting rooms. It had a sofa and a few chairs, and a small table with old magazines stacked on it, and a receptionist waiting at a desk, just like waiting rooms that you or I have been in. But when Violet and Sunny looked at the receptionist, they saw something that I hope you have never seen in a waiting room. A nameplate on the desk read Shirley, but this was no Shirley, even though the receptionist was wearing a pale brown dress and sensible lace shoes. For above the pale lipstick on Shirley's face, and below the blonde wig on Shirley's head, a pair of shiny eyes that the two children recognized at once. Dr. Orwell, in behaving politely, had been the honey instead of the vinegar. The children, unfortunately, were the flies, and Count Olaf was sitting at the receptionist's desk with an evil smile, had caught them at last. Chapter 9 for next time.